So before you really focus on the growth hacking side of things, you need to make sure that your product actually is a must-have for the market that you're targeting.
How to know if our product is a must-have?
In today's episode, we're talking to Sean Ellis, the very person who coined the term growth hacking and helped iconic startups like Dropbox, LogMeIn, and Eventbrite achieve explosive sustainable growth. We'll explore exactly what growth hacking is and how it differs from traditional marketing, the key ingredients every company needs before scaling, and practical frameworks for running experiments that truly move the needle. Sean also shares insights on pinpointing product market fit, activating new users, and building cross-functional growth teams that turn promising ideas into big wins.
Can you briefly define what is growth hacking and explain how it differs from traditional marketing?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with the difference. So traditional marketing is primarily focused around the customer acquisition side of things, like top of funnel. So customer acquisition is kind of traditional marketing in kind of the action where it's actually driving a result. But a lot of traditional marketers also focus on branding, but it's all kind of on the market end of things. Growth hacking takes a similar approach. So if you're trying to acquire customers, you should be using data and experimentation at the top of the funnel, but you're going to be constrained by the company's ability to convert and engage, monetize, retain customers. And so growth hacking looks at the whole picture and uses data and experimentation to drive improvement across all parts of the customer journey. And it tends to be that when you're better at converting and retaining and monetizing customers, it's a lot easier to find cost-effective ways to acquire them. So I started in marketing, but realized that I was only as good as the company could be at converting and retaining and monetizing. So the one other piece with that is that a lot of the things that I mentioned there are controlled by the product team and not the marketing team. And so that's something we can get into at some point in some of the challenges.
And what are the key components of a successful growth hacking strategy?
Yeah, I mean, probably the most important component is you need to be able to measure things, and so you need a good data tracking system in place, and then once you have a good data tracking system in place, then it's really about following the scientific method that's been around since ancient Greek times, or pieces of it. So you need to analyze, look for opportunities for improvement, come up with ideas for experiments, and then some way of deciding which ones you want to run, and then you run the experiments. And so it's a lot more about process. I guess one other kind of really important foundational requirement is that you should have product market fit before you are obsessing on getting a lot more customers. So before you really focus on the growth hacking side of things, you need to make sure that your product actually is a must-have for the market that you're targeting.
How to know if our product is a must-have?
Well, there's the kind of a couple of ways. The most probably the most reliable way is that if people try your product and they keep using it long term, then they kind of vote with their actions. And so if they try it and use it, then you likely have product market fit. For that, though, what I see a lot of companies make the mistake that they're looking at kind of an average churn rate, for example. So I lose X% of my customers every month. That doesn't really tell you much about product market fit. So what you need to be able to look at is your cohort retention rate. So if I acquire, say, 100 customers, the next month, how many of them are still using? The month after that, how many of them are still using? And if you get to a point where that initial group of customers that you acquire are stabilizing, so that you're not going to ever retain 100% of those customers, but let's say you get to the point where you now have 50% of them. The next month you still have 50%. The next month after that you still have 50%. Then you have product market fit within that group of users. And so that's the most reliable way to know if you have product market fit. Another way that I came up with years ago was a question that more and more people call it the Sean Ellis test, but I never called it that. I just originally called it just a product market fit test, and that's asking users on the product, so people who've kind of a random sample of people who've tried the product, really used it, but not necessarily your most hardcore users, but just a random sample of people who've tried the product and hopefully recently used it, asking them how they would feel if they could no longer use the product. And if they say, I would be very disappointed if I could no longer use the product, then that's a good sign that it's a must-have for them and they're going to keep using the product. And so when I came up with that question, I was based in Silicon Valley, and there's obviously a lot of technology companies there, and so I could share that question with a lot of other companies. And over time, I started to realize that there was you needed to have a certain percentage of users who said they'd be very disappointed without the product for that product to be successful in the long term. And so I honed in. It was about a 40% of people saying I would be very disappointed without the product. Most of those products succeeded. If you went significantly below the 40%, those products tended to struggle. And so is it exactly 40%? Maybe not. There's a bank in Brazil that's really successful that only scales new products that they launch when they hit 50% of people saying they'd be very disappointed. So I think it's just important to know that you have a relatively high percent of people who consider your product a must-have, and the best way to know that is to ask how they'd feel if they couldn't have it anymore. And if they say very disappointed, you have that strong signal.
So basically, you're saying to know if you have product market fit, you have two ways: the cohort analysis and the product market fit test. But first, regarding the cohort analysis, you mentioned you create cohorts based on a certain months or based on customer behaviors or customer personas.
Well, so you can segment the data, and you can start to see, is there a certain segment that we're able to retain long term? So that's where you could actually take it down to different customer types. But I think traditionally when you're talking about cohort analysis, you're talking about time-based cohorts. So it could be if you have let's say a very active kind of use case on your product, so people would use it every day, then you're going to probably want to look at how many signed up this day, and then how many are still using 3 days later, 4 days later, 5 days. So you probably look at it on even a daily level. If it's a travel related product, for example, Airbnb, something like that, you might have to look at it on even an annual cohort basis. So it kind of comes down to the frequency of usage, but then you can start to segment. You can say, let's say it's a product that's created for women. The men try it and they don't like it, and so within men they all stop using it. But within the woman cohort, they're much more likely to be long-term retained. So that's just a kind of the broadest segment of 50-50 on the population. But being able to have one group that continues to use it long-term, so you can start to understand who you retain long-term. The challenge is a lot of times if you're looking at retention data, you don't have a lot of other information about those users to be able to know which segment you're retaining. So that's the benefit of the question that I mentioned, is that you can ask other survey related other questions in the survey that start to tell you, again, like men versus women, income range, profession, a bunch of different things. And you can see, okay, when we look just at this group, it's a very high percentage who say they'd be very disappointed without the product. So then you have product market fit within that group.
When I first wanted to use the Sean Ellis test, I was very excited after reading the book. And my first challenge is, who should I send the survey to? Is it everyone? Is it the people who just signed in? Is it people who actually use the product? Is it our fan base? Is it people who hate the product? Who should be our sample, and how many people?
Well, one, if they've never used the product, they're not going to tell you that they'd be very disappointed if they couldn't use it anymore. So that already takes us down to, it has to be people who've actually used the product. And then And then that comes back to what I mentioned earlier, that you want to take a random sample of people who've really used the product. So, if they just, filled out a form, that doesn't mean they use the product. So they have to be able to come in and have a real experience with the product. And so when I'm pulling together a list, I want to say they've used it within the last couple of weeks. Hopefully they've used it at least 2 times overall. But then, of course I can make the numbers go way up if I say, and they've used it 100 times, then you're going to have a really passionate user group, and that doesn't really help you to do that. So it's better to take a random sample of the people who I mentioned, and so the only difference of where you might want to only take people who've recently signed up is if you made some significant changes to your onboarding process. Then you only want to survey the people who went through that new onboarding process to see. And usually in that case, that's when you're trying to improve the percentage who'd be very disappointed. So the first one, you're kind of running it across your random sample of your entire user base, and then maybe with some insights you learn from that, you start making some changes. Then you want to run the survey against the new people who've gone through and experienced the product in the new way.
And to be statistically significant, how many number of people I should take per one survey?
I tend to want to get at least 30 responses on the survey. And so you do see a lot of variability. In some companies, I'll see a kind of a 2% or even less than that response rate to the survey. Other companies like Dropbox, I think we saw closer to a 20% response rate to surveys. A lot of times you'll find that response rate is going to be, the higher the response rate, probably the higher the percentage of people who would be very disappointed without your product. There tends to be some correlation. So if you're having a hard time getting enough people to respond, that can be a signal that maybe you don't have product market fit. But it's not like guaranteed. So, and if I'm running an experiment, my way of not butchering statistically significant is just to say stat sig. So I want stat sig if I'm running an experiment, but if I'm running a survey, I want just enough of a representation that I'm getting kind of directionally helpful signal. So that's where 30 responses. And if let's say 100 responses would be better than 30, but I also don't want to waste especially if it's a startup that doesn't have a huge customer base, I don't want to waste everyone's, I get a response from everyone and then I have no one left to survey. So usually if I can cap it between 30 and 50, that's ideal for me.
The way that to use Sean Ellis test, is it a troubleshooting method to know if you have product market fit, or is it an exploratory question, or how do startups usually use it?
Yeah, I think the very first thing that startups are trying to do is figure out if they have product market fit. And the reason being is if they try to grow a product that doesn't have product market fit, that's the fastest way to put your startup out of business. So you're spending all this money acquiring customers and you can't keep any of them because your product's not good enough yet. So the first time you're running it, you're really just trying to get that signal. Is this product good enough? Should we be moving into growth mode yet? Or should we still stay lean and small and keep iterating on product to try to get the product good enough to grow? But then you have an added benefit of once you say, okay, this product is either ready to grow or not ready to grow, you still have some other questions on the survey that start to help you understand who is the product resonating with, why is it resonating with them, and that's when you can use that information to start to drive improvements in both the product and how people experience the product.
And how can startups with limited resources can identify and prioritize growth opportunities?
Well, it depends. It depends how limited the resources are. Ultimately, if you have really limited resources, then then literally acquiring one customer at a time is depending on the value of the customers. If you're trying to launch the next Facebook, acquiring one customer at a time is not going to get you very far. But if you have an average, order value for customers that's $1,000 or more, then initially acquiring one customer at a time is a good strategy. So generally, I'm personally focused more on the consumer type startups that have over time a higher volume of people coming through the funnel and just more data to run experiments and to optimize things on. So in that case, usually my initial goal is to create enough flow of users to get that feedback on the product. And so there's a great article that I'm sure a lot of your listeners will have come across by Paul Graham that's called "Do Things That Don't Scale." But again, it's just in the beginning, you're doing whatever it takes to get. You're not thinking about, I'm not going to do that because I can't scale to tens of thousands of users through that channel. Initially, every single person who engages with the product is a really valuable asset for you. So you just want to be really aggressive in trying to get people in the door to engage with the product. Now, let's say you've validated 40% of those users say they'd be very disappointed without the product. You learn why. So then partly what you want to do is take that information and start to make adjustments to the product experience. So if you find out that you thought everyone would love the product for this reason, but when you ran the survey, you learn that they actually love it for a different reason, then the first thing you want to do is probably change your messaging to highlight the thing that actually is what attracts customers who love the product. And then you also want to probably change the experience in the product so that it quickly delivers on the promise of that messaging. And so that we really call that kind of the activation step more. So getting them to the aha moment where people can very quickly experience the product in a way that they love it. So that's usually the first place I'm focused on, but you can't improve your activation until you have enough volume of people coming through the funnel into the product. So that's where you will have to do some customer acquisition activity to get them coming in. And so that might be kind of outbound calling if it's a B2B product. It could be usually from a customer acquisition perspective, I'm starting with, is anyone actually searching for what I've created? And so I'm trying to acquire the people who are actively looking for a solution like mine. And so with something like paid search, you can get that going right away. Over time, if you can swap out paid search with search engine optimization, and you can start to get into the organic results, but you're unlikely to get there very quickly in the beginning. So I would at least say start with some paid search, but don't obsess on on being able to figure out how to scale it to thousands and thousands of people coming through per day. Initially, you just want enough flow so that you can start to drive improvements in the funnel, and then as you drive improvements in the funnel, then it's going to be easier to acquire new customers. So usually companies where I'm struggling to acquire customers, it's because it's just so hard to get started with the product. And even from there, so for Dropbox, for example, we really did once we had the onboarding funnel working really well, then we spent the majority of our time on getting existing customers to refer other customers. So whether it's through natural usage of the product or them recommending the product to other people and giving incentives for that, that was where we spent the majority of our focus. And ultimately, Dropbox on just those two levers, so getting the activation right and getting the referral right, Dropbox reached $1 billion in recurring revenue faster than any SaaS company before it. So you don't necessarily ever have to spend money on on kind of traditional channels or digital channels to acquire customers, sometimes your existing customers can be your best asset for growth. But yeah, so it's going to be really dependent. There's not an exact formula of what you need to do and in which order to start to grow. But in the case of Dropbox, it was just so clear there was a lot of customer passion, and then there's a lot of functionality of that product that had, when someone shared a file, the person on the other end was going to be exposed to Dropbox. When someone sets up a collaboration folder, the person on the other end has to sign up for Dropbox. And so there's just a lot of natural usage pieces that suggested that was probably an area where we should invest a lot of time.
So first, to mention experiments. Do you have any practical framework for running effective growth experiments?
When you say framework, what do you mean?
You're consulting with a startup. They don't really do a lot of experiments. How do you tell them, hey, is it every 2 weeks, every 1 week? How do you experiment? Who come up with the ideas? Exactly what are we experimenting? Is it the product? Is it marketing side? Is it messaging? Is it messaging? Is it design?
Mm-hmm. So the answer is yes on on all of those. So yeah, you can experiment anywhere. You can experiment. Marketers in most companies have been experimenting for decades already. Like as soon as you had return on investment that you could track online very easily, and you could test different advertisements in channels, it was pretty natural to go that direction, to start seeing which ad gets the best response rate and drives people who ultimately become active users on the product. But then where you specifically experiment outside of that is going to depend on what are the biggest opportunities for your company. So from a framework perspective, I would say the first thing that I'm trying to do is identify where is the best opportunity for my company right now. So it's either what is preventing growth. So we have something that's kind of broken in our customer experience, or maybe even an opportunity that's just like an untapped opportunity that if we focused on that, we think we could unlock a lot of growth. So it starts with the opportunity, and then within that opportunity, I'm generally trying to generate as many ideas as I can against that opportunity. So let's say, for example, it is around activation. So we say majority of people who are signing up for our product never become active users on our product. They sign up, maybe use it once, maybe never even use it. And we feel like if we can get them to become active users on the product, this business will be much more successful. So then you potentially can start to generate a lot of ideas against that. But what I would say, even before you start to try to generate those ideas, you want to try to contextualize, like you want to answer the question, why are they only using once and never coming back? Why are they only filling out a form and never actually using the product? And the more that you can contextualize it, and you can do that contextualization through surveys. So you can say, okay, people who did this but didn't do this, we're going to create a group of those people, and we're going to survey and ask them why, what happened. But you can also run usability tests. You can even kind of just study your own onboarding and try to figure out why is it so difficult for someone to use this product or to start using it regularly. So you come up with a set of hypotheses based on that feedback, and then you want to generate lots of ideas. And so historically, I used to come up with the most of the ideas myself in earlier companies, and then I realized that if I share all the context and information and ask other people across all parts of the team for ideas, I tend to get some really good ideas from other people. Yeah, so I can get good ideas from other people across the company. And then even more recently, I've started to plug it into ChatGPT, and I'll just say, I have this type of product. People are doing this and not doing this. Surveys say this is why they're not doing the things I want them to do. So putting as much information in there, generate 10 ideas of ways I could improve the activation rate for this product. And often it comes up with some pretty good ideas as well. And, I can say, add a hypothesis to each of those ideas. And I can even follow up and say, how specifically would I run this experiment? And so ChatGPT can be really helpful there. But, ultimately you want to be able to get as many ideas as you can against a high leverage opportunity. And then once you have a lot of ideas against that opportunity, then you need a system for deciding which ones you want to test.
And do you use ChatGPT to rank them, the ICE score as well?
I can, yeah. So I've done that. So let's start with what ICE is for anyone who's not familiar. So ICE is a scoring system I came up with about 10 years ago that essentially takes each idea and says, the best idea is going to be one that you're very confident is going to be successful. If it's successful, it's going to be very high impact, and then it's really easy to run the test. That would be the best idea to run usually, but unfortunately, most of the time there's a trade-off, and the one that has the most potential for improvement, maybe you're not that confident it's going to work, or it's really hard to run that test. And so we have a scoring system called ICE, where you're on a scale of 1 to 10. How much potential impact, best case scenario, could this achieve? And then how confident am I that this is going to be successful on a scale of 1 to 10? So that would be the C in ICE. And then E's, how easy is it to run this experiment? And then, you can then use those to compare ideas a little more easily. So ChatGPT can be really helpful there as well. You can say, here's a bunch of ideas, create ICE scores for these ideas. The benefit of that is that it's gonna probably remove some of the bias that, if someone's creating a score for their own idea, they might be too generous in the scores. Whereas ChatGPT, is not going to have that bias there. But the downside is it's probably going to lack some of the creativity. So if it's something seems like it's not very easy to run that experiment, sometimes you can be creative and come up with if we ran the experiment this way, what we're really trying to figure out is this question, and we don't need to run the full experiment. Maybe we just, run the experiment this way, and we can get a faster way to that answer. So, there could be an easier way to run that ChatGPT but immediately doesn't come up with.
I love how you're using ChatGPT for this. My next question is, what is the different stages of a growth hacking funnel, and what is the most critical and often overlooked step?
Yeah, I think that I've covered probably the most critical one is activation, because it's not really what most marketers would focus on, because it does require, getting involved with the product and kind of often code and design and things that marketing teams don't have access to. And then, at least on the code side. And then a product team often doesn't focus on activation because they're thinking more in terms of, features and what is the long-term vision for the product, and, what is the next thing we're adding to it. And so you have this part in the middle there that new people have a hard time getting started with the product. And so I have found in company after company that's usually the first place I start in trying to drive improvement, because one company, we saw about a 10x improvement in the sign up to usage rate for that product. That's LogMeIn from, 20 years ago. But that was like a very important stage in my career to recognize that, like, I could not be a very good marketer if the product was not set up in such a way that that customers could easily get in and get value from the product. And so I learned I was very dependent on the product team to be able to do my job well as a marketer. And so it wasn't until product and marketing worked together on that challenge that we ultimately fixed the part of the business that was the most broken. And from the moment we did that, the business went on a path to become worth billions of dollars. But it was up before that stage, we were really struggling. So I would say, if there's any first place to focus. Activation is usually the place to focus. And I think teams often, especially internationally, are surprised when I say that, in Silicon Valley, a lot of the fastest growing consumer businesses spend half of their product development resources just on activation. Just from a ratio perspective, like, most product teams don't want to spend a lot of time on activation because that's kind of going in circles versus, creating a better and better product, or, a product that has more stuff in it is kind of the, what gets a lot of product people excited. But, a great product that no one can use is not really a great product. So that's the mental shift that I think more and more, product and marketing teams are getting on the same page, that, we need to collaborate on that layer, and a growth team can help with that as well.
Can you share a little bit more details about what do you mean by activation? And can you share this example from LogMeIn?
Yeah, so activation is essentially, before activation, all you have is a bunch of messaging and promises, really, and maybe some forms, like you get people excited about this product you created, and then you make them sign up for it. So they have to fill out some forms, maybe even download some software, go through some steps to be able to use the product, but they don't really get to the moment of like, wow, this is great, until they try the product, until they actually get in there and have an experience with the product. And so that's what we call activation, is when they have that first experience that makes them say, oh, this is exactly what I wanted. And so in the LogMeIn case that I mentioned, so LogMeIn is software that you could install on one computer and then remotely access it from any other computer just using a web browser. And so we launched that business about 20 years ago. And when we first launched it, we were organized, in the traditional way. I was head of marketing. We had a product team. They were building it. I was marketing it. But 95% of the people who came in and signed up for the product never once did a remote control session. So they would fill out the form. They would get excited enough. They'd fill out the form. And then when it came time to actually using the product, something was happening. And so if they don't use the product, they're not, we had a free version and a paid version. But if they don't use the free version, they're definitely not going to upgrade to the paid version. They're not going to recommend it to their friends. They're not going to pay us any money. And so I then was not able to get a good return on investment on my marketing dollars if we couldn't, convert, retain, and monetize those customers. And a lot of the areas that needed improvement were controlled by the product team. And so fortunately, we had a really good CEO who recognized when I shared the data with him that this is not going to be a business that we could grow if we didn't make it a lot easier to get started with the product. And so that's when he essentially told the product team, stop working on the roadmap, and told my marketing team, stop trying to find new channels. We'll use the existing channels we have. There's enough flow going through there. And then marketing and product will work together to improve that first user experience in the product. And so it starts with that growth hacking process of analysis. So trying to understand why people are not using the product, why 95% of the people who sign up never use the product. And so again, usability tests, surveys, trying to isolate where people are getting stuck and why they're getting stuck, and then coming up with experiment ideas to improve how they get started with the product. We even, at that point, we had a theory that maybe our previous company was a game company that didn't require software to be downloaded. And so we thought, maybe we're just unrealistic about the millions of users we hope to acquire, and in downloadable software, maybe you just can't get to those numbers. And then we said, but are there any counterexamples to that theory? And we realized that the instant messaging products of the time were required to download and were at hundreds of millions of users. So that was a good counterexample. So then we went and studied what does their install process look like? How have they made it easy to get hundreds of millions of users, and so got some good ideas from that of things to try at our install process. And so a lot of, ultimately what you're trying to do is increase enough desire, so build enough momentum so that people who are trying to get started with the product are so excited about it, they'll go through a little bit of a pain to get started, and then at the same time try to reduce that pain as much as possible. So if you can reduce friction, increase desire, you're going to get a lot more people to that experience that makes them become a long-term user. We knew once they did their first remote control session that most of those customers became long-term happy customers. And so, in 3 months of just lots of ideation, lots of testing, we improved our sign up to usage rate from 5% to 50%. So now, it still doesn't sound great. Like half the people who try to sign up still aren't using the product, but we were 10 times more people are now using the product off of the exact same channels based on these changes we made. So it's 1,000% improvement in our sign up to usage rate. And at that point, it meant that, money that I was spending on marketing where I was losing money, now I was getting a great return on investment. So if I spent maybe $1, only got 50 cents back, now that same dollar is getting me $5 back. I would have had to cut it before. Now I want to pour as much money as I can in there. So we were able to significantly increase the amount of money we were spending with it, and had a very fast payback on those marketing dollars. And then that still only accounted for about 20% of our new customers. 80% were coming in through word of mouth. Now that people were having a great experience, particularly because we had a free version, then they're telling their friends about it. And so now we just, ultimately that put us on the path to the multi-billion-dollar exit that happened, about 4 years ago.
So what I'm hearing is activation is the fastest way you can get the customer to actually use the product and get value of it, or get the aha moment. Is that correct?
Exactly. So if they don't have a great experience with the product, then you're kind of dead. Then all you have is great marketing that creates a bunch of desire. But if you can't kind of deliver on that desire, people lose interest really fast. So you have to use that initial interest to deliver something where they say, wow, this is something that I want to keep using. And if you can get them to that point, we call that the aha moment. That's activation. And you can identify it because when people do that, they're much more likely to be long-term retained on the product. And so that then becomes the goal, is to get them to that point as quickly as possible.
Oh, okay. So take Instagram, for example. If I download Instagram and create an account, I'm not activated yet. I need to download the account and follow 5 people, for example.
Yeah. I don't know what Instagram's is, but for Facebook, where it's more about making a connection rather than a follow, you need to, I think it's 7 people in 10 days. And so you need to have at least 7 people that you're connected with. And once you have 7 people you're connected with, when you come back the next day, you're likely to see fresh content in your feed. But if you don't connect with anyone, even if you spent hours creating your profile, if you come back the next day, you get no new value when you come back. And then the day after that, you come back, no new value. So it becomes really important for Facebook to get you to 7 friends before you give up. And they know that if they can't get you there in 10 days, they will likely lose you. And so, and that starts to shape things they do with the experience. So they could say, well, we lose most of those people anyway, so let's show them lots of ads to try to recover the money before we lose them. Or they could go the other direction and say, let's show them actually less ads. And in place of those advertisements, say, here's some people you might know. You're already connected with this one person. And then, so do you know this guy? Do you know this girl? Do you know this guy? And then over time, once you get to those 7 people, now they know they have you for the next year or 5 years. And so they can show you lots of advertisements. So they can start to be more aggressive with the advertisements. But the initial goal is to, in the past, I think marketers looked at conversion was getting someone to fill out a form, but that's not really converted. That's just, you just got a lead. So to really convert someone, you need to give them an experience that makes them say, wow, this is something I want to keep using.
So basically what I'm hearing, the basic requirements for growth hacking is 1, product market fit, 2, you have data to collect data, and 3 is you have a team, correct? These are the 3 most important things.
I mean, technically you could have one very dynamic person who could do all of this. Yeah. But it's unlikely. But yeah, if you had someone who's got great design skills, who built the initial product, and they're running surveys, they get some feedback that people who actually use it love it, so they feel like, okay, I have product market fit, and then they start to say, okay, how do I get that first user experience right? And so yeah, but again, I'm talking like, but we know that there's companies that have been, even I think the Instagram team before they got acquired were maybe only like 7 people. So the view of, to be $1 billion company, you need to have, hundreds and hundreds of people. I think they were acquired for $1 billion plus and only had 7 people. So you can potentially do this with a really lean team, but the trick becomes, how can you do this at scale, and what is the organization that best allows you to do it at scale, and I think there's not like a one size fits all to it, but there's probably some pretty good principles of what you can focus on as you build that organization around having delivering a customer experience that helps you build a very passionate user base of customers.
What are the common mistakes companies do when starting growth hacking efforts, and how can they avoid them?
So I think the first mistake is that they're trying to do it like too early. So they're essentially, they have not validated that anyone likes the product they've created, and they're saying, okay, let's just throw enough people at it and we'll grow anyway, and that doesn't work. And so step 1 is validate that product market fit, and then I would say a lot of the mistakes around growth hacking come down to it's particularly in different parts of the world. In Europe, a lot of times when somebody talks about growth hacking, it's just a rebranding of marketing. They're like, oh, we're doing growth hacking. It just means really creative marketing, and that's important. Creativity is important in marketing, but to that example of LogMeIn, I think shows that I had tested probably thousands of advertising combinations on different media, and we were stuck with LogMeIn because most people who signed up were not able to have a great experience with the product before they gave up. And so there's nothing I could have done on the creativity side that would have grown LogMeIn until we figured out the activation issue. And so it would be the same thing if you didn't have product market fit. It's even worse. There's no like getting that first user experience right, because the long-term user experience is not valuable. So first you need to validate the long-term user experience, then the first user experience. And and I don't recall what the question was now, but that's going down a path there.
I'm talking about the mistakes people usually do when start implementing the growth hacking.
Yeah, so I think and then the other piece is just like randomly kind of trying to test. I would say that almost any business that is over 100 employees that tries to do growth hacking fails like over time. And it's not because they can't be creative. It's because they aren't taking the time to get everyone on the same page first. So they, to be effective, you need to be cross-functional. I mentioned that you need to have essentially your ability to acquire, your ability to convert, your ability to engage and retain and monetize and drive referral. All of those, as a company gets bigger, sit in different teams. And if those teams are not on the same page around how growth works and why it's important to drive improvement, then then teams try to do this, and what happens is that they get pushed to where are they actually able to run the experiments, and it tends to be that they're only able to run them in marketing. And then when they're running lots of experiments in marketing, as I mentioned in the case of LogMeIn, if you can't convert and retain and monetize those customers, you know, the marketing side of things can only take you so far. And so that would be the biggest mistake on a team over 100, but even like once you get to 20 or 30, even you start to get more siloed organizations. It's just normal. People become more specialized over different parts of the business, and they spend less time talking to each other. And so it's a very coordinated effort to get teams working together to unlock growth in the business. And so that would be the starting point, is you just don't get that upfront alignment. Another key challenge can be is if you're just not systematic about it. You know, I started with saying, identify your biggest opportunity, really deeply understand it, come up with lots of ideas against that opportunity, start testing those ideas. I see a lot of teams that just start saying, let's run a growth hack here, let's run a growth hack there, and they're just kind of like just randomly taking guesses across a lot of different parts of the business. And that's probably better than not testing at all, but you're unlikely to focus enough resources on important opportunities that to really drive meaningful growth.
Any other mistakes that you see a company use as well?
I think those would be the main ones. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of little like minor mistakes. There's definitely the other piece that I would say is, you know, they're running experiments, but they're not like kind of thinking it all the way through. So they're not sort of, you know, they may not even ever analyze the results to the experiment they ran. They set up a test and then they forget they set the test up. And so, you need to be able to very carefully track what you're testing, know when you have enough of a sample size that you can say, okay, I now have a result that we can make decisions off of, and then you make the right decisions off of those. And so I think, again, it's a sort of a sloppy approach to growth without having, without being really systematic about it, and knowing that we want to focus on the right opportunities. And then when we run tests, we need to make sure we run them for the right amount of time. We analyze the results, we take the right actions on the learning. And when you build the right rhythm around this, it becomes really powerful. But it's just hard. Most teams are just not used to operating in that way. And so you have to go through a learning curve of really building the right kind of habits and cultures cross-functionally in the organization. And when you nail it, you have a much better opportunity to really scale and build a great business. But when you don't, the team starts to say, oh, yeah, we tried that growth hacking thing, it didn't work, and then they just give up and they never try it again.
Now, let me ask you this. I know you've thought a lot of this question. How can cross-functional teams collaborate effectively on growth initiatives?
So that's what I was saying. I go still into some companies, and I'll do like a 6-month interim VP growth role where I come in and I have a very systematic plan of what I'm going to do over a 6-month period. And the very first thing that I'm doing is I'm going in and deeply understanding that product market fit. But that only takes me like 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. And then the next thing I'm doing is getting all of the functional leaders together for a full day to essentially get on the same page around how growth works and how we can more effectively work together to drive growth. And I would not take on one of these roles without that piece, because what happens is I would have to spend all of my time and creative energy just convincing people to let me run an experiment. and it would just it would lose momentum too quickly. And so it's in my contract. It's required up front for me to have a full day with the functional leads across the business, and sometimes the full business. Like I had a company in Portugal that I just worked with that had the majority of the business for the full day in this program. So I do it when I'm going to come in and spend 6 months working with a team, but also I'm often brought in. So I worked with a bank in London as well, just about a week and a half ago, called Monzo Bank, one of the really the successful banks of England, the neobanks that have popped up. But a lot of the success that they've had up to this point was taking a more traditional approach to growth. And so as they are now forming a growth team there and have kind of the pieces in place, it's within the last year that they've put those pieces in place. It was a good opportunity for me to come in and spend time with the product team and the growth team and some marketers, and ultimately take them through a full day program to get everyone on the same page around how growth works, how they should be working together on growth, and even identifying those best opportunities and coming up with some ideas around those opportunities, and hopefully unlocking the momentum to start executing growth in the right way. So I think, again, that's why I said, if you're 100 people or more in a company, you're almost guaranteed to fail if you don't do this approach. If you're like, 9 or 10 people, you could probably just, jump in and start doing growth hacking, and there's a good chance it's going to work. And then, but somewhere in between 30, 40, 50, 80 people, you probably still need to get some of that upfront alignment before you embark on it, or you're gonna ask a lot of people to do things they're not comfortable with. And again, it's not because people don't want to drive impact on customers. It's just that they, if you look at teams across a company, especially in a smaller company, they have such an important list of things they want to do already. And if they've got engineers working for them and designers, and they have all those people align with the list of things that they want to do, and then suddenly you're saying carve out some of that to start running tests. And then particularly if there's a misperception that a lot of the kind of growth tests or growth hacking tests are going to be spammy pop-ups and hurt the customer experience, then they'll be even less enthusiastic to participate in it. And so for me, when I'm running a program with a team, I'm not even talking about testing for the first half of the day. First half of the day, I'm just talking about, value. How do customers get value from this product? And that's why I'm running the survey before, so that I can say, this is what customers are telling us how they get value from the product. And then what does product control? What does marketing control? How do we look at the overall engine in this business of how these parts fit together, so that we can take someone from not even knowing about our product to ultimately being a really passionate, engaged customer on our product. And so kind of coming together and getting on the same page around what does the machine look like that creates that outcome. And then we start getting into where are the areas that can be improved within that machine. And then we get into experimentation. Okay, the way that we actually drive that improvement is through experimentation. And then I introduce the whole growth hacking process and methodology. But it doesn't make sense to even go into that if you're on a totally different page around, who's our target customer and how do they get value from the product and what's their journey look like. So we have to get everyone on the same page first before we start talking about how do we work together to drive improvement.
So first thing, you mentioned that you do the surveys in the first week or so. When you say surveys, you're talking about the question is, which people will be disappointed if they stop using the product, or do you have other list of questions, which is
I have other questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I have some other questions there. So like most important question with that one is, what is the primary benefit that you've received? And so if they say, I'd be very disappointed and without this product. So it's a must-have for me, and this is the main benefit I receive. And then I have a different group of people say, I wouldn't really care if the product went away, and they're focused on a different benefit. Then that starts to say, okay, this core benefit that the must-have users are focused on, that's the benefit that we need to highlight in our messaging. That's what the product is truly great at delivering. And then also, we should streamline so that it quickly delivers on that benefit. But I have other questions on the survey. For example, have you recommended the product? If they say yes, I say, how did you describe it? And that's usually some great context. It's kind of a funny side note is I'll ask a CEO, what does your business do? What does your product do? And they're usually talking to investors and so sometimes I don't even want to focus on the practical because they want it to sound big and interesting and potentially valuable someday. And so a lot of times I come away even more confused when I ask a founder or CEO what their product does. But if I read 10 answers from customers who say, yes, I've recommended it, and this is how I describe it, then it's like, oh, that's what they do. Now I get it. So, just for me getting my own head around the business, that question can be really valuable. Another question on there is, if this product were no longer available, what would you use instead? So that's where you start to find out, one of the things you find is people who say I would be somewhat disappointed if I could no longer use this product usually have a really good alternative in mind. Like, oh, I would just use this product instead. It does kind of the same thing. So it means that they're focused on kind of a commoditized benefit in the product, a benefit that's easy to get from something else. But if they say, I don't know what I would use, or I guess I'd go back to spreadsheets, but I would hate that, then you start to see like, okay, you start to even say, you start to learn people who use these products are ones, our target customer is someone who's coming from spreadsheets to do this thing, or, whatever the business that you're in. So, again, we're just trying to get as much context. I often put some demographic questions on there, like, are you using this for business, using this for personal use? All of that starts to again tell me who are the people who really need the benefit that we're delivering with this product. So it gives me more insights in the targeting, and then of course the classic, how did you discover us? And it helps me track over time word of mouth, and so if they say I found out about it from a friend or a colleague, or I was searching for it, or I saw an advertisement for it, or I read an article, but giving them some of those choices start to say, people who you can again start to use those as filters. People who find out about it from a friend are much more likely to consider it a must-have. So maybe the friend's telling them how to use it, and so you're trying to get as much of that understanding. And for me, when I'm going in and working with a team on this, a big part of the benefit of running the survey first is that when I sit down with them, it's not like I'm just presenting a kind of like the 101. This is the normal way to do this in all companies, but I'm starting with, here's why customers love this product today, and we're already at X%, so we know we have product market fit, or we have a good indication of that. And so kind of being able to pull all of that together, it doesn't feel like it feels very customized to them when I start with their own information. And it should be, because every business is different. So taking the time to learn about their business, and a lot of times it means that in 1 week of research, I'm gonna know more about their customer and their business than a lot of the team does, because they just don't necessarily know the right questions to ask, And so I have a really fast way of being able to uncover the information in a way that's fits into this process of ultimately building a scalable engine of growth. So the other thing we haven't talked about that fits in with a lot of this is the North Star metric. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's usually once I've identified what the must-have benefit is for the product, then there's a big discussion across the team of, what is a metric that captures that benefit? And again, part of the reason being is when companies fail with growth, it usually is because they are not able to get out of their own silos and their own kind of functional goals to think about the big picture. And so if we start with how do customers get value from this product, we agree on that. Then we say, how do we build a metric that reflects how much value we're delivering? Now we're having a conversation about how do we truly impact customers who need our product. And so, I think when you can get people out of their silos, like everyone agrees we need to be providing impact for customers. And so that goal is easy to align around. And then, but how do we truly measure that impact starts to be, the next piece. And so then having a big conversation. So that's what a North Star metric is, essentially something that everyone in the business now can focus on growing. And so it's not just about getting new signups for a product or, at the average usage time increasing or average revenue per customer, but it's essentially saying, how do we capture how much impact we're actually having on customers? And so what I have seen is teams will debate a North Star metric for months, a lot of times, trying to get the perfect North Star metric. And perfect is the enemy of done is kind of a cliche saying. And so in my workshop programs, I'll give them 30 minutes maximum to agree on a North Star metric and give them a framework for that. So some of the framework for it, again, needs to capture that value, but it needs to be also something that can be that can grow over time. So it should not be a ratio or a percentage or like net promoter score. It needs to be something that you can keep going up and to the right over time. And then I give them a process of like how to narrow down and make the decision on it. And so the benefit is once you have a core metric, now all of your experimentation ultimately needs to impact that metric. But again, without having that conversation about a North Star metric, then the conversation about should we run experiments and how should we run experiments and how do those compare to the other priorities that I have in my department, those are really hard conversations to have because there's no way of being able to make those decisions until you say, ultimately, the North Star metric is the thing that we're trying to grow. And so one other piece I'll say on that, and I'll give you an opportunity to ask some questions on North Star metric, is revenue tends not to be a good North Star metric because, particularly let's say you're in a SaaS business and you only have annual contracts. And so you could look great on a revenue curve, but if most of the people who paid for the full year have stopped using the product, you want to focus on the value you're delivering because those people are not going to renew. Eventually, the revenue is going to drop. So if you focus on the value you're delivering, then growth in your revenue is much more likely to be sustainable over time. Another example I'll give you is if you say you were Facebook again, and you were trying to you said, okay, let's maximize revenue. You say you took North Star metric where their North Star metric is actually more of a daily active user metric. But if they focus on revenue instead, they might make some short-term decisions like, well, we're falling short on our revenue number. Let's put more ads on every page. And that's going to hurt the user experience. And so the users will go down, but the revenue goes up. And then the next quarter, they have to put even more ads to hit their revenue target. And so it's kind of it creates this doom loop where if instead their decisions are around, how do we figure out the right number of ads on the page that does not hurt our ability to grow the daily active user number, they're more likely to have sustainable revenue over time. So that's kind of in both cases, revenue is ultimately the long-term goal. And then the one last thing I'll say is when you have a value metric, that teams just tend to get a lot more excited and motivated long-term to grow a value metric than they are around a revenue metric. A revenue metric just feels kind of like cold and less inspiring versus like, even if it's active accounts in at a bank or, people who are reaching their weight loss goals in a weight app, like, revenue's important there, but the thing that drives you day to day is more of your mission. So hopefully it feels like progress on the mission. So I don't know, any questions on North Star metric, or did I answer everything?
You answered most, but can you share a story when you went in the company and you chose the right North Star metric and the thought process that went behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share some story. Like a lot of it is, kind of NDA stuff, so I have to be careful not to say too much from specific companies. But I'll give you an example. I was working with a well-known public company that I've actually done 3 different workshops for different business divisions of this company, and they're in the auction space. So someone can fill in the gaps there. But they also have a classifieds business, which was one of the businesses I was working with at the time. And I remember the general manager said, "Oh, we can skip the North Star metric conversation," and because we already have a North Star metric. And so I knew how foundational it was to the whole program to make sure that you had the right North Star metric. So I said to him, "Can I at least ask the team if they know what the North Star metric is?" And he's like, yeah, go for it. They're going to know. So I asked the team, and only about 1/3 of the people said that they believed they had a North Star metric. And then when I asked them what it was, they all gave a different answer from what the general manager had given. And so when I asked him, okay, what was the North Star metric you had in mind? It was a really complicated formula. And so one of the big benefits of a North Star metric is that it's something that everyone can kind of use in their day-to-day activities as a lens of like, am I working on the right stuff? And so when it's this really complicated formula that no one can remember, it loses that power. And so then our challenge was, so this company did not track the actual transactions. So they help to make a match between buyers and sellers, but they don't track the actual transactions that are happening. So then we had to try to figure out what is the best proxy behavior that we could see that would actually tell us that they're likely making a transaction, which is the goal of the platform. So you have a buyer and a seller in a classified situation. And so then we came down to, well, they have to talk to each other. So we could use chats as that proxy. But another thing I have in my workshops of kind of like things to watch out for. So worst case scenario, how might this lead the team to behave in the wrong way? And so when we ran that test against the chat metric, it was like, well, the team could then optimize for chats to where this is no longer a product for buying and selling. It just becomes a chat product, which takes us away from the kind of whole mission and goal of the business. And so then we reframed it to a certain sequence of chats, like one chat, a response, and then a response. Like when we saw that combination, we were trying to maximize that combination, and that became the, and so we essentially called it a transaction chat. And so that became the North Star metric, was trying to grow the combination of those chats.
That's a beautiful example. Since we're speaking about chat, should companies with network effects, let's say a chat application, scale earlier than traditional businesses, or they should still prioritize validating product market fit?
Yeah, it's a tough one because obviously you need a certain number of people to be able to know if you actually have created value. So when it's a network effect, so let's take Uber for example. Like, let's say I've got a handful of drivers across the United States and a handful of potential riders across the United States. And every time a rider wants to get a car, they have to wait 2 hours. Like, I do not have product market fit. Those riders are going to say a taxi is way more convenient than this. And so you have to grow enough drivers then to be able to make it so that when someone wants to order a car, there's a car there in a reasonable amount of time. But the same thing, if you have all these drivers who have the app and then they're waiting and they only get one ride every 2 weeks, then they're going to turn off the app. They can't build a livelihood off of that. So then I need to grow the riders. So now we're back in the challenge of I need to grow riders and drivers to validate product market fit. And so, of course, then Uber did not roll out across the United States all at once. They roll out kind of city by city. And so for a network effect, you do want to limit your growth, but you want to generally constrain it to, in the case of Uber, maybe regionally. In the case of like an eBay, maybe across just a couple of items initially, and then you can increase the different items that people can be buying and selling. But you want to create something that's narrow enough that you can build critical mass on both sides. And then once you have that critical mass, so you have to grow to that critical mass within that kind of more narrow target market. That's when you can find out if you have product market fit. If you don't have it there, adding 10 more markets will probably kill your business pretty fast. So you want to get it right in a single market, maybe 2 markets. Maybe there's something unique about a single market that you're over-indexing on that market, and maybe the formula just doesn't work there. So maybe you do 2 markets, but you're not going to do 50 markets. Like that would be crazy. To the amount of money you have to spend to grow within there, only to find out that you don't have product market fit would probably put you out of business.
And should the growth funnel of those companies with network effects prioritize stages like referral or virality over retention and revenue?
So activation is going to be really important, even if you focus on referral. So if just because I tell you should sign up for this product, if you go to try to use it and it's not very easy to use, you're going to be in trouble. So you're not going to convert. So I would say focus on activation first, and then probably referral after that. And you do see a lot of network effect businesses that grew off of referral. Part of it is because even before they can monetize, like if you take like a Facebook or a LinkedIn, a lot of their monetization was advertising. And so they had to get big before they could monetize, and they couldn't spend a lot of money to get big. So that kind of pushed them to referral as being the one way they could potentially get big and not have to spend a lot of money to get there. And so in both those cases, it worked pretty well.
Do you have any story where you were surprised how other companies using growth hacking or the Sean Ellis test?
Probably the story that was the most interesting for me. I used to run even some bigger presentations and bigger workshops where I'd have multiple companies, and almost always I would get the feedback from the banks that this doesn't apply to us. We're a highly regulated industry. It can't apply to us. And then when I did a world trip earlier this year, I came across a company that is probably the most interesting company I've seen in the last several years. And they are a bank, and they had essentially applied mostly my product market fit test to grow, but they do a lot of experimentation as well. And that's NuBank in Brazil, but they're a $75 billion valued company, over 100 million customers, and grown primarily organically, so without having to spend a lot of money on customer acquisition. And again, they're the one who I mentioned that they only scale. So they started with credit cards, and then over time they built the business by adding one product after the other in terms of financial products. But each product that they develop, they do not aggressively promote that product to the base until it gets above the 50% of users saying they'd be very disappointed without it. And so they really used that question. And the nice thing with that question is that they didn't say, oh, we can't do any of this because we're in a highly regulated industry. They looked at kind of all the things I was saying, and they said, what can we do in our industry? And that question was something that they could definitely do. Like regulation was not going to get in the way of doing that. And then they still are probably going to be on a slower testing pace than they could be if they were, just a consumer product that, consumer app or something. But they really nailed the product market fit question to launch more and more products and features.
That's so exciting. I definitely need to look into it more. I assumed that you would say superhuman.
Yeah, I think Superhuman's interesting in that they took my survey, and I always had this concern that, like, I basically ignore the people who say they'd be somewhat disappointed if they could no longer use the product, because it's like they're the nice to have people. I just ignore them. And part of the reason is that if they said, oh, here's all the things that you need to change so that it's a must-have for us, maybe I end up breaking the product for those people who already think it's a must-have. So, like, to me, it's about like doubling down when I see a strong signal. But what Superhuman did was, once they found the core benefit that the must-have users are focused on, they said, in the somewhat disappointed group, the group that would be somewhat disappointed without the product, which of those users are also focused on that core benefit, and how do we improve the product for them? So now they're still doubling down on the core of the must-have benefit. So I think that helps, but at the same time, like, it's really hard to know how successful Superhuman is. Once a company's public and you see their revenue, and I love what Superhuman did. I know that the email space is notoriously hard. That's I worked in the email space back in 2007. It was really tough. So. It's not probably my biggest surprise from my world trip was meeting with the TikTok team from they're based in Singapore, and they said that a lot of what they did, basically the team that was the growth team for TikTok was created about 2 years before the launch of TikTok inside ByteDance for another product that ByteDance, the parent company, had. And then they really learned how to do growth hacking well, but they said they essentially everything they tried, they got right. It was before my book had come out. So everything they'd seen that I had blogged about, and I didn't have that many blog readers at the time. So it was really cool that they had applied a lot of that and then applied it to TikTok. So for me, it was a bigger surprise. Like, I know TikTok is huge. That was the only thing with Superhuman, is that they've done some cool stuff. They definitely helped to popularize that question, but because it's a private company, it's really hard to know how actually successful they are.
Oh God, I love this answer. It's exciting that you contributed into the huge growth of TikTok. That must be very validating.
Yeah, especially when I see the United States Congress fighting over it, and knowing that, like, maybe if they didn't read my stuff, you wouldn't be wasting your time on it. But
that's a different way to look at it. Oh God, I need to be very respectful of the time. We only have 7 minutes left. There's one question I have in mind. If you rewrite now, Hacking Growth, the book, and if there is anything that you would change or add?
I would probably put a lot more emphasis on how you can implement it in more established companies. I think as we laid it out in the book, it's the perfect roadmap for a relatively new company. But Microsoft was one of the first companies that bought a lot of the books. I think they bought maybe 5,000 books before it was even available to the public. And when probably within a few months, I had feedback from the Office 365 group that we're trying to do this and we can't do it here. And can you work with us on developing a workshop? So my whole workshop format initially started with them, but it essentially, I said a company over 100. I mean, imagine how big Microsoft is. Like, most big companies really struggle to implement it. And so, that's good in a sense, because I'm more of a startup guy myself. So I like when startups have the kind of dynamic advantage to take on the incumbents, but at the same time, I think Microsoft's a great example of a company that is so resilient. Every time you write them off as like, oh, they're the technology of the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, they reemerge as one of the great tech companies. And so even though it is the advantages are for a startup to do this, I think you saw from their CEO pushing growth hacking and then really across the company trying to figure it out and making great progress with it. So that would be the biggest thing I'd add. People always ask me like maybe write something with AI, but I feel like anything I'd write about AI right now, in a year we'd look back and be like, oh, that was so stupid. You wrote like a toy. AI is, but it's just evolving so fast that like by the time it comes out in print, it's no longer relevant. Where one of the big advantages we had in the book hacking growth, we sold 750,000 copies of the book now, probably closer to 800,000, and we focus a lot on just like what are the unchanging parts of growth. What is the evergreen part that some of the process, how consumers make decisions and how teams work together to drive a consumer to become an active customer. A lot of the psychology and the kind of scientific method for improving those things doesn't change over time. And so that's why we've seen like a pickup of momentum over time. So I'm glad that we were not so tactical about it. But yeah, the one thing that I don't think I would have been capable of writing about it in 2017 when we wrote the book is the how to effectively have bigger, more established teams adopt the approach, but now I feel like I could add a chapter on that.
If there's any new books or resources you wish you have written or you wish that you have come across earlier in your career?
So much of my learning, I started in marketing in the mid 1990s. And so it was kind of the perfect time of, I had no marketing background before the internet came, but I started right at the beginning of the internet. So I was able to invent a lot of the stuff as I went along. And so there wasn't, we had to figure it out. There weren't books, through time. There's like, I love Nuriel's book Hooked. I think is a great book on just learning how to make your product kind of more habit forming. There's I think the Cialdini book on influence is amazing on just kind of learning sort of how you get people to take actions and influence like hard decisions on people. And so I think there's kind of some principal pieces that can be layered in there, but so much of my learning has just been kind of over time. What I can say is that I partnered a few years ago with a data scientist from Meta who had really deep product skills and data skills, who taught me a ton, and we created a course together called growpractice.io. And so I probably learned more from him than anybody when it comes to growth. And he's not quite half my age, but definitely decades younger. And so it's really cool that when I can learn from somebody who is quite a bit younger. And yeah, so that, and then, increasingly now I'm doing a lot of writing on Substack as well. And so for me, a lot of my learning comes from just like, how do I take like the seeds of an idea and really like flesh it out and research how other people are doing it and process it. And then, in creating an article, I'm organizing my own thinking and teaching myself as much as I'm kind of teaching the audience as I write something. So it's fun to get back into writing. I've been probably 5 or 6 months now, much more actively writing on Substack than I had in the several years before. And I think when I was a founder and a CEO, I started that's when I stopped writing to a large degree, was because so many of the things that encourage me to write is when I get questions that maybe seem obvious to me, but then people ask me questions and I'm like, oh, that's not obvious to people. And so, once I start talking with other CEOs and founders, it starts to help me realize the things that seem obvious to me that maybe aren't, are good things to write about. Because the worst is when you write and you feel like you're writing that water is wet and the sky is blue and just like a bunch of obvious things. But in talking with founders and other growth people, sometimes things that seem obvious to me are not so obvious to others. And so it's I need that stimulation to be able to write to like, oh, people don't know this. Okay, I'll put this down.
And trust me, we're very grateful that you're still writing. And I know we're out of time, but we barely scratched the surface here. Where can our audience go to learn more, or how can we work with you? Who's the ideal candidate? Which company the ideal candidate to work with you guys?
So I ideally on the workshop side, kind of anybody. As long as I already have product market fit. And then I love to do hands-on roles where I go get involved with a company full time for 6 months. That's usually a very specialized, they need to be kind of, usually like the ideal is between like 10 and 20 employees kind of before they have developed a bunch of bad habits, but when they've validated product market fit and, I can help to figure out the growth engine and get them on a growth trajectory a lot faster than they probably get on their own. And that's a fun stage for me to work at. I get lots of opportunities later than that. It's just a lot harder for me to drive impact later on where and it's not as fun for me. So in the right, or like early stage, usually like have raised like a Series Seed or a Series A round of capital, and then I'm just partnering with the founding team to build a good growth trajectory in the business. That's a super fun stage for me. So my website where you can reach out to me is seanellis.me, and but you can also access my Substack from there, and connect with me on LinkedIn. Another good place.